Nice. Okay, so next speaker is Max that will talk about breaking the P to the 2/3 barrier for sequential calibration.
Hey everybody, my name is Max. I'm here to talk to you about breaking the T to the 2/3 barrier for sequential calibration. This is joint work with Yuval, Kostis, Noah, Bobby, and Prince Will. I want to kick things off by talking about the sign preservation game. But more so, I want to play the sign preservation game. I need a volunteer. It's a 2-player game. Anybody? No, let's go with you. So, come on up, I suppose. Okay. The sign preservation game is a 2-player game. There's the pointer player, will be me, and the label player will be you, okay? The game is gonna work like every round, we take turns. First, I, the pointer player, am gonna point at one of these spots. Then you, the label player, are going to say plus or minus. Minus. We label the slot with a minus. Is that clear? Can I can zoom in? Nice. Okay, so the game works by, we go back and forth doing this. And my goal as the pointer player is to get either 3 pluses or 3 minuses down on this board. Your goal as the label player is to prevent me from doing this, okay? Here's the catch. Let's say, we still got some more instructions, So let's say that this was the state of the game. Here's one artifact of the game. If I ever point at a square, and there are any pluses to the right of where I pointed, those pluses get deleted. Okay. Similarly, if this is the state of the game, and I point at a square, if there are any minuses to the left of the square, those get deleted. Now, as the pointer player, this is not in my benefit, right? The pointer player is trying to get signs down on the board, so the fact that my point deletes some signs is not to my benefit. But sometimes you, as the label player, can force me to do some deletions, okay? So right, you delete pluses on the right, minuses on the left, and we're gonna go for 9 turns, okay? You're gonna try to stop me. Are you ready? All right, let's do it. All right, here we go. I'm gonna point here.
Plus.
He went plus. Cool. Next turn. I'm gonna point here. Minus. All right. You've put me in a spot where I have to delete something, right? If I point over here, I'm losing the plus. If I point over there, I'm losing the minus. C'est la vie. I'm gonna point here. Now that is gonna delete that plus. All right, your turn. Plus. Cool. I'm gonna point back in the middle. Minus. A little symmetrical. All right, I'm gonna point over here. That is gonna delete the plus. Now, be careful. Your next move could end the game. Plus. Well chosen. All right. Now I'm gonna point here. Plus. All right. Now I'm gonna point way over here. That's gonna delete all of these minuses. Gotta go minus. All right. Now I'm gonna point here. All right. And with the final round of the game, I'm gonna point here. Lost the game. So that was the sign preservation game. We just played the sign preservation game with 5 spaces and 9 rounds. The value of this game for these parameters is 3. That means that if the pointer player is playing with perfect strategy, I can force you to get either 3 pluses or 3 minuses down. But also, if the label player is playing with perfect strategy, you could prevent me from getting 4 pluses or 4 minuses down. The focus of this work is understanding, for a general number of spaces in a general amount of time, what is the asymptotic behavior of the optimal value of this game. Okay, why do I care about this? Well, understanding strategies in this game ties to understanding what are the optimal rates for sequential calibration. Okay, what is sequential calibration? Let's say that you're a weather person, and every single day you're tasked with the forecasting of the rain for the day, okay? every single day, you produce a forecast, and then observe whether or not it rains. Okay? So on this day, you predicted 20% and it rained. We repeat. On the next day, you forecast 30%. You observe the outcome of the weather. We repeat this for capital T days. And your goal as a forecaster is to be calibrated. Meaning that if you look back at all the days where you forecast 20%, it empirically rained on about 20% of those days. If you look back on all the days where you forecast 30%, it empirically rained on about 30% of those days. And the crazy thing is, we want to do this even when the weather is selected by an adversary. Okay? So formally what this model is for every round T over capital T days, a forecaster and an adversary are simultaneously going to produce a forecast and a binary outcome. At the end of capital T days, for this particular forecast P, we can look at the empirical frequency of outcomes. So that's summing over all the days where you forecast P of the average of these outcomes. And then we can define our calibration error to be essentially summing over my forecasts of essentially the absolute difference between the forecast and the empirical frequency. We weight it by how many times we played that forecast. If a forecast was played a large number of days, the weight that will be placed on this calibration error will be larger. Cool.
Do you assume it is a discrete prediction?
So all the algorithms we're going to consider end up involving a discretization. If you just, should this be an integral? It's like if you discretize to 1 over t, it ends up being effectively the equivalent problem. So don't worry too much about discretization. So this was this quantity that was studied for a long time. In 1998, there's this landmark result by Foster and Vora, and they realized that it is actually possible to devise an algorithm such that even against adversarial outcomes, you can guarantee that your calibration error is sublinear, okay? Meaning that essentially as time goes to infinity, your average calibration error will converge to 0, which is kind of crazy. This means that you can just sit inside, not look out the window, produce predictions according to this algorithm, and guarantee that you'll be a good weather person over time, even though you're not even looking at the clouds. Kind of crazy. In terms of lower bounds, there's kind of just a simple lower bound you can get from the adversary simply determining the weather every day by a fair coin flip, okay? Against this adversary, there's not much better than you can do than like a square root of t calibration error. Okay, so you have this gap between these two quantities. What's the optimal rate of calibration? Okay, so in 2021, there's this paper by these dudes Chow and Valiant that introduce the sign preservation game. And they use the sign preservation game to show that actually you cannot calibrate at a rate better than t to the 0.52, okay? Everyone was like, what's going on here? This is a crazy math question. We make further progress on that question here. In this paper, we prove that you can actually calibrate on the upper bound side at a rate of t to the 2/3 minus a constant epsilon. That's about 1 over 1,000. And on the lower bound side, we improve further to t to the 0.54. And we actually also do this with an oblivious adversary, meaning an adversary that's not even responding to the specific forecast that I'm producing. Okay, and we do all of this using the sign preservation game, okay? As we will see, strategies for the two players in the sign preservation game give us strategies for the forecaster and the adversary in calibration, okay? Namely, strategies for the label player lead to algorithms for the forecaster, and strategies for the pointer player lead to strategies for the adversary in calibration. Cool. Let's talk you through this. So first what I want to do is kind of go through this, proof by heart. It's kind of also a folklore result that also recovers this t to the 2/3. So we can see where this t to the 2/3 comes from. Then we're going to see why intuitively there would be hope for understanding the sign preservation game to give us better rates for this calibration problem. And then we're going to discuss strategies for the sign preservation game. Sounds like a plan? Cool. All right. So, yeah. Someone say something? Okay. Anyway. The fish, yeah. Max Fish. Okay. First, quick recap. on the minimax theorem of von Neumann. Let's say we have a two-player zero-sum game, like rock, paper, scissors. We could consider two versions of this game. In the first version, you have two players that act simultaneously, producing an action. On the other hand, you could view this in a turn-based fashion, where one player is tasked with going first, but they are allowed to produce a probabilistic distribution over actions. Then the second player responds, and then you sample from that first player. The minimax theorem states that these two, the optimal value, given optimal play for these two players, is going to be equivalent in these two settings, whether you view it as a turn-based or simultaneous thing, as long as you allow for randomness. Okay? The same is true of calibration. So, for one setting of calibration, you could have, at every single time step, the two players act simultaneously, producing forecast and outcome. Equivalently, you can prove that the setting of calibration, in which, at the start of every day, the adversary produces a Bernoulli random variable, saying, at the end of the day, I will determine the rain according to this Bernoulli variable with this probability. The forecaster responds to that, and then you sample. And then we repeat that turn-based dynamics over the different days, produce the Bernoulli, produce the forecast, sample. You can prove, via minimax, that these two settings of calibration, where they're trying to minimax the total calibration error, are going to be strategically equivalent. And therefore, if you can come up with algorithms for the forecaster in this setting, it proves the existence of algorithms in this setting for the forecaster, okay? So for the remainder of the talk, just what we're going to do is we're going to study the forecaster in this setting, who gets to respond to a Bernoulli random variable that they perceive at the start of the day, okay?
You don't need an algorithm. I mean, the existence of the distribution is already okay against this. Use the distribution to calibrate.
Right. I guess we're referring to, I guess, the forecaster play. I guess, right, we're reviewing it as like, right, okay, in one sense, right, you can produce a distribution over forecasts. You're reviewing it as they're producing a distribution over outcomes. Again, this is just going to be the simpler way to think about the problem. So, in this minimax setting, what is the optimal algorithm for, or what is the simple algorithm to accomplish this calibration? It's essentially going to be, at the start of every day, you observe this Bernoulli probability that it's going to rain. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some discretization of the space of predictions to k predictions. And we're going to round the Bernoulli probability to the nearest of these predictions. And that is the forecast we're going to produce, PT. Okay, what rate do you get here? I guess on the one hand, you know, if k is too small, this discretization is too coarse, you're going to incur this kind of 1 over k gap of calibration error every day. Summing over capital T days, you have this T over K calibration error. On the other hand, you don't want to have too many actions. So even if, think about it, right, even if Q and P were exactly identical to each other, there would still be a calibration error in the sense that this Bernoulli random variable Q is then sampled, right, to produce either a 0 or 1 outcome. So if I only play this prediction once, and that even if it was exactly equal to the Q, you then sample this, and so there's going to be this calibration error. I need to play this prediction, this forecast, sufficiently many times, get sufficiently many samples of these Ys, such that you enable the average of these distributions to concentrate around P, okay? So it's this trade-off of if I have too many predictions, I don't get this, like, I don't predict each prediction enough to have concentration. If you go through the analysis of the, just the concentration bound, you get these two trading off terms, and you realize that if you set k to be t to the 1/3, that's the optimal balance, and you get this t to the 2/3 calibration error in this setting. Okay, how do you improve on this though? Let's say that at some point in the algorithm, the adversary selects this Bernoulli probability. Now, Hart's algorithm would suggest, okay, we should play this action, round it to the nearest discrete value. But what if, at this point in the algorithm, there's also there happens to be this prediction over here that happened to be negatively calibrated. It just happened to be the case that, this prediction just over the course of the game thus far ended up raining less than we expected when we predicted that forecast. Rather than listening to Hart's algorithm and playing this action, it would actually be in our incentive to deviate and play this action with the hope that, given that it's almost certainly going to rain tomorrow, I'll actually have, in expectation, a good chance to actually decrease the calibration error of this prediction. Instead of listening to the algorithm, I have a chance to correct an error. But now what if this wasn't a coincidence? What if, as I was running Hart's algorithm, I had this foresight that, I think at some point later in the algorithm, the adversary is going to point over here. One thing I might do is modify Hart's algorithm and actually shift this prediction P a little bit to the left, or to the right rather. What that would do is I'm actually intentionally attempting to create a forecast that has a negative calibration, knowing that I'll be able to correct it later. I'm essentially intentionally placing a minus here, expecting that later the adversary is going to point to the right of the minus and thus enable me to delete this negative calibration error. A little bit of a sign preservation thing going on here, right? Okay, that is kind of a hand-wavy understanding of how sign preservation ties into improving Hart's algorithm. Now, so the proof then goes through 2 steps, right? So first what we do, okay, I'm gonna simplify. Essentially, it is first understanding how strategies in the sign preservation game lead to algorithms for calibration, both on the upper and lower bound side. And then there is understanding strategies in the sign preservation game. Essentially, the sign preservation game is parameterized by 2 things, by space and time. For various tunings of these parameters, we get strategies in this game leading to better algorithms for calibration. For the sake of this slide, let me just talk about the parameter regime where space is equal to time. They're both n spaces and n rounds. We have the following. We have that the label player in sign preservation, who's trying to up or bound the number of signs, if they're able to keep this quantity below n to the 1 minus epsilon for some constant epsilon, that's going to give you an algorithm for calibration that gets strictly better than t to the 2/3. And similarly, on the adversary side, if you give me a strategy for the pointer player, which forces the number of signs to be at least something strictly larger than square root of n, you get algorithms for the adversary in calibration that force calibration error to be greater than square root of n. Okay, so the details of this reduction are a little complicated, there's a lot going on, but let me take this time to discuss the sign preservation game a little bit. Cool. Okay, I don't have a lot of time.
Maybe a question?
Yeah.
So the previous slide, like, is there some a tight result for the sign preservation would give a tight result for calibration with these parameters?
Right. I mean, I guess at one point, it was not understood whether it was possible to get sublinear rate. It was possible in this regime that the adversary can force omega n, so it's possible in this regime when we start working on this problem that the adversary could force a linear number of signs, which would give you a matching t to the 2/3 lower bound, okay? However, now that we know that actually the label player can create a sublinear number of signs, then this technique of going through this reduction, at least how we reduced it, we could probably do it better, will not give you, there will be no hope to actually get a matching upper and lower bound. So we gotta do something else, but progress. All right, cool. All right, I don't have a lot of time. So main ideas for the sign preservation game. So we're gonna come up with a strategy for the label player, for you, okay? So when we have n spaces, we want to devise an algorithm, A over n spaces, that's going to tell me, essentially, given the state of the game, given that there's these signs and that the pointer is here, the algorithm tells me whether to place a plus or a minus here. Okay. The core idea, and so the goal would be that if this algorithm runs for t time steps, that the value of this game, the number of pluses or minuses, the maximum, is going to be bounded by n to the alpha times t to the beta, where alpha plus beta is less than 1, okay? If I guarantee that alpha plus beta is less than 1, then for the regime where n equals t, we have guaranteed a sublinear number of signs placed down. Okay, the idea of the algorithm is to do something recursive, okay? You're gonna take 2 instances of your algorithm over n over 2 spaces. One is gonna help me determine what to play on the left side, one's gonna help me determine what to play on the right side, okay? So essentially, what you're gonna imagine is the following, right? Oh, I lost the slide. Okay, we're back. Okay, what you're going to imagine is the following, right? Essentially, over t time steps, the adversary is going to point to the left half sometimes, and they're going to point to the right half sometimes. So let's say they spend tau rounds pointing at the left half, and t minus tau rounds pointing at the right half, okay? I want to assume an inductive hypothesis. So I want to assume that my algorithm on n over 2 spaces satisfies this, and then I want to prove that my algorithm on n spaces satisfies this. So essentially, what this would guarantee is that the value number of pluses and minuses on the left side would be this quantity, the number of pluses and minuses on the right side would be this quantity. I think I'm running out of time, so let me just kind of hustle through this. There's a lot of regimes in which the induction would go through. First off, if there's an imbalance in what the adversary does, maybe they only spend 1/3 of the time on the left and 2/3 of the time on the right, then the inductive hypothesis will go through. The number of signs, the number of pluses, let's say, on the left side will be n to the alpha 2 to the beta times 1/2 to the alpha plus 1/3 to the beta. On the other side, it's 1/2 to the alpha, 2/3 to the beta. There's a way to choose alpha and beta summing to less than 1, such that this quantity is less than 1. The induction goes through. The bad case is the case when the adversary roughly splits their time between the two halves. If you try to do the naive induction, you're left with this constant, which is not going to be less than 1 for alpha plus beta less than 1. Okay, so we need to do something more intelligent. We haven't used the fact that we delete signs. So let's zoom in on this bad case where the adversary splits their time. There's more that can be said there. Essentially, even if the adversary is splitting their time, it's okay if they're going back and forth. Okay, so imagine that what the adversary does is they point left, right, left, right. They're jumping back and forth between the two halves frequently. What we notice is that every time they point at the left side, all the pluses on the right side get deleted. And every time they point at the right side, all the minuses on the left side get deleted. Okay? So really, at the end of the day, if they're doing a lot of back and forth, it's going to be okay, because we're really only going to have pluses on the left and minuses on the right. Again, we have this inductive hypothesis saying that this is the value. But what this means is essentially the total number of pluses on the left side, or the total number of pluses is going to be this number on the left side, and effectively 0 on the right side, right? And same for the minuses. I'm doing a lot of hand waving. This is all to say that really the only bad case is when the adversary splits their time equally, and they do so by essentially playing heavily on one side for maybe the first half, and then they spend the entire second half on the right side. This would delete all the minuses from the left side, but now we're going to have a bunch of pluses on the right side as well as the left side. Those don't get deleted because we never went back. All right, so what this means is that, while the number of minuses would be good, the number of pluses would be bad. Okay, to get around this, you strengthen your inductive hypothesis. What you actually produce is an algorithm that has both a space and a bias term. And what I'm attempting to do is actually prove that this algorithm will either will force the number of minuses to be at most lambda times that quantity, or force the number of pluses to be 1 over lambda times that quantity. So if I set lambda to be equal to 2, I'm saying I'll take 4 times as many minuses, twice as many minuses as long as you keep the number of pluses to be 1/2. Okay, so what does this accomplish? The point is that, what we're going to do is go through the intuition of those cases we just went through. If the adversary is kind of going back and forth, we're okay, we don't need to change anything. As we said, things are getting deleted properly. Also, if the adversary is just placing a ton of mass on the left side, we're going to be happy because it's going to be imbalanced. The only bad case is when they build up a bunch of mass on the left side, and then they start playing right to the point that it evens out. Okay? This is kind of this bad case that we discussed, right? When it ends up being equal, but it was a lot of left first and then right. Okay? The idea here is, at this point in the algorithm, we replace this sub-algorithm with an algorithm with a little bit more bias towards minus. Okay? The point being that, it's okay because we don't really have to worry about minuses. They're all gone from over here. But we just want to ensure that we don't deal with the pluses. So we let that, equal out. We then do this reset thing. We do a doubling trick. There's a lot of details. That's the core idea. Essentially, at the end of the day, this recursive algorithm is, we only place a bias on one of my children in this specific case where left goes up and then right catches up. And then when you unravel this whole recursion, it's a whole tree, and the algorithm is simply doing, going down the branches of the tree, which of these branches introduce a bias, and then respond to that bias. And so summing down the branch of this tree, root to leaf path, if there's more plus minus, then if there's more plus bias, then minus bias, you will label this plus or minus, vice versa. Okay, there's also an oblivious lower bound, which is a pointer player who is actually pointing and just doing kind of a random walk, independent of the pluses and minuses. That's kind of a crazy fact. Here's one thing I'll just kind of say about this. I guess this is not necessary. Okay, this guy's different. Okay, that's one walk. Here's one fact. If you do a random walk with steps according to this, so at every single time step, so we're doing a random walk on the integers, every single time I go plus or minus, IID, equally probability, with step size that is the largest power of 2 dividing the integer of the step, then you can actually prove that this random walk only uses a linear amount of space, but has this property that once we exit a point, we never cross back over it with probability t to the 0.52, which is actually slightly larger than square root, which is kind of crazy. And essentially understanding the oblivious lower bound is just understanding random walks that don't cross themselves, but also don't use too much space. So that's a funky also problem that's still open, but we made a little progress on that. That's some mathematics. I guess none of this is. Yeah, it's cool stuff. I mean, yeah. Thanks. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so there is no time for questions, so you can make them all offline. So let's thank Max once again.